Greetings and welcome back to 303 Junior English. We now continue with our conversation in Arthur Miller's Crucible, and I'm with you on pages 1140, 1141 and following. We are into Act 1, and we have just had the exchange between John Proctor and Abigail, where Abigail and John Proctor show us the level of tension that is at work behind the scenes of this play. Now, just to remind, we have had dancing in the woods. We have had some attempt at witchcraft. We have had a couple of girls who have been affected by this, and Betty, the Reverend Paris's daughter, is one of them. We have had Abigail make threats to the other girls to say, "You better not tell anything or I will jack you up." And we've had this conversation between Abigail and John Proctor. We now are going to continue with the tension, and already there's this building of conflict in the play by Miller, as we will have Miss Putnam and Betty's going to wake up and she's going to start screaming. So as we hear it here, I'm just giving you a heads up. It's kind of obnoxious and loud. But the point is, down below they're worshiping. Up in the room, Betty wakes up and starts screaming. And immediately Mrs. Putnam, who has already said the problem in Salem is there are witches loose. Ironically, she's one of the people who has solicited the help of the witches through Tituba. And then you're going to have the introduction of Rebecca Nurse. Now I'm going to read with you on 1141, 1142 before we hit the play button to just get a sense of everything that's going on. Everything is quiet after Betty Nurse will calm down. Rebecca walks across the room to the bed. Gentleness exudes from her. Betty is quietly whimpering, eyes shut. Rebecca simply stands over the child, who gradually quiets. And while they are so absorbed, we may put a word in for Rebecca. Rebecca was the wife of Francis Nurse, who from all accounts was one of those men for whom both sides of the argument had to have respect. So let's write this down. Rebecca Nurse is married to Francis Nurse, and Francis Nurse is a really class act. He was called upon to arbitrate disputes as though he were an official judge, and Rebecca also enjoyed the high opinion most people had of him. By the time of the delusion, they had 300 acres, and their children were settled in separate homesteads within the same estate. However, Francis had originally rented the land, and one theory has it that as he gradually paid for it and raised his social status, there were those who resented his rise. So let's put it in our notes. We have a situation where Francis Nurse is going to have some negative energy shown towards him because he has wealth, he has land. Okay, and so this is going to be another one of those motivations. I mean, we mentioned a number of these motivations that are kind of hiding, right there behind the scenes. This will be one of them. I'm continuing to read. Another suggestion to explain the systematic campaign against Rebecca and inferentially against her husband Francis is the land war he fought with his neighbors, one of whom was Putnam. So you can already begin to see what's going down here. This squabble grew to the proportions of a battle in the woods between partisans of both sides, and it is said to have lasted for 2 days. So let's put a note to ourselves. The irony of all ironies, when these people leave England and come to America, again, for religious intolerance reasons, they are themselves religiously intolerant. We've already pointed this out. But also, you go from people who do not own land for the most part, fighting over owning land. And of course, the irony is the amount of land that's involved in America on the continent is huge, and yet, right away, it becomes part of the huge fight. Of course, let's go ahead and say it for American history purposes. The history of America can often be defined as a history for the fight for land, all right? I mean, on a number of counts, obviously. As for Rebecca herself, the general opinion of her character was so high that to explain how anyone dared cry out for a witch, and more how adults could bring themselves to lay hands on her, we must look to the fields and boundaries of that time. As we have seen, Thomas Putnam's man for the Salem ministry was Bailey. The Nurse clan had been in the faction that prevented Bailey's taking office. So in other words, you got hurt feelings within two families. In addition, I'm at the top of 1142. In addition, certain families allied to the Nurses by blood or friendship and whose farms were contiguous with the Nurse farm or close to it combined to break away from the Salem town authority and set up Topsfield, a new and independent entity whose existence was resented by old Salemites. So you've got, obviously, bad feelings going on. That the guiding hand behind the outcry was Putnam's is indicated by the fact that as soon as it began, this Topsfield nurse faction absented themselves from church in protest and disbelief. It was Edward and Jonathan Putnam who signed the first complaint against Rebecca. And Thomas Putnam's little daughter was the one who fell into a fit at the hearing and pointed to Rebecca as her attacker. To top it all, Mrs. Putnam, who is now staring at the bewitched child on the bed, soon accused Rebecca's spirit of, quote, tempting her to iniquity, end quote. A charge that had more truth in it than Mrs. Putnam could know. Now we're going to watch this exchange that will happen between all these different people. What I want you to pay attention to is the tension, the dynamic tension between them. We're going to pick up now at the bottom of page 1140, 1141. So go there now. Again, just to remind, we are working now with a recording that is an edited recording. So just to remind, as we get into this, if you start reading lines that are being recited, but you're not reading those there in front of you, skip down a few, find your way, and you should be all right. All right, here we go. We're back to it now. Let's watch this exchange and the dynamism of this exchange, all right?
Sweet Jesus. What's she doing? No. What ails you? Stop that wailing. Hey, what happened? What are you doing, Hale?
The song. She cannot bear to hear the Lord's name.
No, God forbid. Mercy, run to the doctor. Tell him what's happened here.
Mark it, my sign. Mark it.
That child is a notorious sign of witchcraft of foot-goody nurse. A prodigious sign.
Rebecca, let's go to her. We're lost. She suddenly cannot bear to hear the Lord's
Is she
name.
going to fly again? I hear she flies.
There's hard sickness here, John Scotty, so please to keep the quiet.
And be quiet now. Sorry.
Now, Betty. There, Betty. Good child. There. What have you done?
What do you make of it, Rebecca?
Goody nurse, will you go to my Ruth and see if you can wake her?
I think she'll wake in time. Pray calm yourselves. I have
We're on page 1142.
26 times a grandma, and I've seen them all through their silly seasons. And when you come on them, they will run the devil bowleg, keeping up with their mischief.
Hey, that's the truth of it, Rebecca.
This is no silly season, Rebecca. My Ruth is bewildered, Rebecca. She cannot eat.
Well, perhaps she's not hungered yet. Mr. Paris, I hope you're not decided to go in search of loose spirits. I've heard promise of that outside.
For my opinion's running in the parish that the devil may be among us, and I would satisfy them that they are wrong.
Then let you come out and call them wrong. Did you consult the wardens before you called this Reverend Hale to look for devils?
He's not coming to look for devils.
Then what's he coming for?
There'll be children dying in the village, mister.
I see none dying. This society will not be a bag to swing around your head, Mr.
Pray,
Butter.
calm yourself, John. Mr. Paris, I think you'd best send Reverend Hale back as soon as he comes. This will set us all to arguing again in the society. And we thought to have peace this year. I think we ought to rely on the doctor now and good prayer.
Rebecca, the doctor's baffled.
If so he is, then let us go to God for the cause of it. There's prodigious danger in the seeking of loose spirits. And I fear it. I fear it.
Note the irony, right?
Let us rather blame ourselves.
Oh, may we blame ourselves. I am one of 9 sons. The Putnam seed have peopled this province. In it I have but one child left out of 8. And now she shrivels.
And I cannot fathom that.
But I must. You think it's God's work that you should never lose a child, nor grandchild either, and I bury all but one. There are wheels within wheels in this village, and fires within
When
fires.
Reverend Hale comes, you will proceed to look for signs of witchcraft, Mr. Paris.
You cannot command Mr. Perez. We vote by name in this society, not by acreage.
I never heard you worried so in the society, Mr. Proctor. I do not think I saw you at Sabbath meetings in Snowflake.
I have trouble enough without I come 5 miles to hear him preach only hellfire and bloody damnation. You take it to heart, Mr. Perez. There are many other who stay away from church these days because you hardly ever mention God anymore.
Why, that's a drastic charge.
Oh, it's somewhat true. There are many who quail to bring their
I
children.
do not preach for the children, Rebecca. It is not the children who are unmindful of their obligation toward this ministry. My contract provides I be supplied with all my firewood. I'm waiting since November for a stick, and even in November I had to show my frostbitten hands like some London beggar.
You are allowed £6 a year to buy your wood, Mr. Paris.
I regard that £6 as part of my salary. I'm paid little enough without I spend £6 on firewood.
60 plus 6.
1144.
£66, Mr. Proctor. I'm not some preaching farmer with a book under my arm. I am a graduate of Harvard College.
Aye, and well instructed in arithmetic.
You are the first minister ever to demand the deed to this house. The last meeting I were at, you spoke so long on deeds and mortgages, I thought it were an auction.
I want a mark of confidence is all. I am your third preacher in 7 years. I do not wish to be put out like a cat whenever some majority feels a whim. You people seem not to comprehend that a minister is the Lord's man in the parish. A minister is not to be so lightly crossed and contradicted.
Aye.
There is either obedience or the church will burn like hell is burning.
Can you speak 1 minute without we land in hell again? I am sick of
It is
hell.
not for you to say what is good for you to hear.
I may speak my heart, I think.
What? Are we Quakers? We are not Quakers here yet, Mr. Proctor, and you may tell that to your followers.
My followers?
There is a party in this church. I'm not blind. There is a faction and a party.
Against you?
Against him in all authority.
Why, then I must find it and join it.
He does not mean that.
I mean it solemnly, Rebecca. I like not the smell of this authority.
No, John. You cannot break charity with your minister. You're another kind, John. Clasp his hand. Make your peace.
I have a crop to sow and lumber to drag home.
Moment, Mr. Proctor. What lumber is that you're dragging, if I may ask?
My lumber from out my forest by the riverside.
Why, we are surely gone wild this year. What anarchy is this? That tract is in my bounds. It's in my bounds,
In your
Mr.
bounds,
Proctor.
I bought that tract from Goody Nurse's husband 5 months ago.
He had no right to sell it. It stands clear in my grandfather's will that all the land between...
Your grandfather had a habit of willing land that never belonged to him, if I may say it plain.
Let's get your lumber home, John. I feel a sudden will to work coming
You
on.
load one oak of mine and you'll fight to drag it home.
And we'll win too, Putnam, this fool and I. Come on, John Proctor.
I'll have my men on you, Cordy. I'll clap a writ on you.
Pray you, someone take these books.
Mr. Hale. Oh, it's good to see you again. Oh, my.
All right, let's pause for a moment and make some quick observations about the exchanges that just transpired. There will be obviously some incredible irony in what goes on in these lines. Let's go back to 1142, 1143 really quickly. Notice that Mrs. Putnam, who is of course one of the women who is going to create a lot of the negative energy in this town, will even say it on 1142. Notice, this is no silly season, Rebecca, right? Because her Ruth is ill. Obviously it is a silly season. I want to point out on 1143 that Rebecca Nurse is able to say something quite remarkable at the very top of the page. She says, "Pray John, be calm." And then, "Mr. Paris, I think you'd best send Reverend Hale back as soon as he comes." This is significant because Hale is the next one about to show up in the next scene. "This will set us all to arguing," did you see the word? "This will set us all to arguing again in the society. And we thought to have peace this year. I think we ought to rely on the doctor now in good prayer." There's something very subtle that Miller is pointing out here. When crazy happens, whether it be in Salem or whether it be in 1950s America with the Joseph McCarthy hearings, it always seems to follow on some experience that happened before and the hope for peace. Notice here she says, we're going to all start fighting again, and that's bad news. Of course, notice Rebecca continues, there is prodigious danger, she says, in the seeking of loose spirits. I fear it. She says it again. I fear it. Let us rather blame ourselves. It'll be Miss Putnam a couple of lines later that will say, there are wheels within wheels in this village, fires within fires. That may be the line of all lines of Act 1, because that really does tell us what's going on in this village of Salem. Then all of a sudden we're going to have fighting. Notice that the fighting will happen between Putnam and Proctor. It will happen between Proctor and Paris. And Paris will in fact charge Proctor, there's something wrong with you. You haven't been in church. And Proctor will come back to say, I'm sick of all of this preaching about hellfire and brimstone all the time. I don't trust you, in other words, is what he's saying. Notice Proctor on page 1144. I may speak my heart, I think, to which then the accusation is, we are not Quakers here. Then it will be Paris that says it. There is a party in this church. I am not blind. There is a faction and a party. And then Proctor will say, if there is, then I better find it, and I better join the one that's against you. So let's write it in our notes right away. We have clear tension happening between any number of people in the village of Salem. Let's also put it in our notes, this observation. Notice, you have got Proctor. He's got issues on all sides. Proctor's got a problem because he slept with the girl Abigail, and they had to fire her, and now there's all these rumor stuff going down. Proctor's got issues with Paris, the preacher. But let's point out something about Proctor that's significant. Let's say it out loud. Proctor represents the American spirit of independence. We have said in earlier lectures that one way to define America is don't tell me what to do. This is foundational to the notion of the Declaration of Independence. It's foundational to understanding the character of Proctor as well. We will watch Proctor at the beginning of the play, a man who is ready to stand up and fight for what he thinks is right. Of course, this will obviously be the reason that we call the Crucible a tragedy at the end, when, of course, we've got a Proctor who is a broken man. Notice at the very last line on page 1144, Proctor will even say it, because Rebecca tries to calm Proctor down. He says, I like not the smell of this authority. Right? Now remember, we're obviously a number of years before the Declaration of Independence, and yet one of the things that Miller is pointing out is that this independent spirit of America is born of this Puritan kind of exclusivity. Rebecca will say it. You cannot, top of page 1145, you cannot break charity with your minister. You are another kind, John. Clasp his hand, make your peace. But Proctor is not interested in making peace with Paris. And then all of a sudden, you've got Giles Corey, who's this old man who sides with Proctor, get into it with Putnam over land. And so all of a sudden we got all this land stuff happening. By the way, let's just jump on 1145 to the literature and context information and your history connection. Read it with me really quickly. The Inquisition. Miller alludes to the Inquisition, a court of justice established by the Catholic Church in the 13th century, but he does not describe it. The Inquisition bore some resemblance to the Salem witch hunts of the 1690s and to the Red Scare during the 1950s. In each case, a panel of judges decided allegations of heresy or treason. The Salem judges sentenced some to death, as had the Catholic judges of the Middle Ages. No one died in the 1950s as a result of the Senator McCarthy's accusations, but many suffered damage to their personal and professional reputations. Right? To connect the literature question, what else might the Salem trials have in common with the Inquisition? There's any number of ways to think through that question. All right, we're now ready. Interestingly, right at the end of this fight, when you have these different men going at each other, all of a sudden, Mr. Hale shows up. Now again, let's go to it on 1146, and let's read about Mr. Hale for a few moments and see what we can learn about him. Mr. Hale, read with me, I'm on 1146. Mr. Hale is nearing 40, a tight-skinned, eager-eyed intellectual. This is a beloved errand for him. On being called here to ascertain witchcraft, he felt the pride of the specialist whose unique knowledge has at last been publicly called for. Like almost all men of learning, he spent a good deal of time pondering the invisible world, especially since he had himself encountered a witch in his parish not long before. That woman, however, turned into a mere pest under his searching scrutiny, and the child she had allegedly been afflicting removed her normal behavior after Hale had given her his kindness and a few days of rest in his own house. However, that experience never raised a doubt in his mind as to the reality of the underworld or the existence of Lucifer's many-faced lieutenants, and his belief is not to his discredit. Better minds than Hale's were and still are convinced that there is a society of spirits beyond our ken. Range of knowledge means ken here. One cannot help noting that one of his lines has never yet raised a laugh in any audience that has seen this play. It is his assurance that, quote, we cannot look to superstition in this. The devil is precise, end quote. A line that Miller says should have been laughed at because of its irony and never has been, he said, in performances. Evidently, we are not quite certain even now whether diabolicism is holy or not to be scoffed at. And it is no accident that we should be so bemused. Like Reverend Hale and the others on this stage, we conceive the devil as a necessary part of a respectable view of cosmology. Ours is a divided empire in which certain ideas and emotions and actions are of God and their opposites are of Lucifer. It is as impossible for most men to conceive of a morality without sin as of an earth without sky. Since 1692, a great but superficial change has wiped out God's beard and the devil's horns, but the world is still gripped between two diametrically opposed absolutes. The concept of unity, in which positive and negative are attributes of the same force, in which good and evil are relative, ever-changing, and always joined to the same phenomenon, such a concept is still reserved to the physical sciences and to the few who have grasped the history of ideas. When it is recalled that until the Christian era, the underworld was never regarded as a hostile area, that all gods were useful and essentially friendly to man despite occasional lapses, when we see the steady and methodical inculcation into humanity of the ideas of man's worthlessness until redeemed, the necessity of the devil may become evident as a weapon designed and used time and time again in every age to whip men into a surrender to a particular church or church state. Top of 1147. Our difficulty in believing the, for want of a better word, political inspiration of the devil is due in part to the fact that he is called up and damned not only by our social antagonists, but by our own side, whatever it may be. The Catholic Church, through its Inquisition, is famous for cultivating Lucifer as the arch-fiend, but the Church's enemies relied no less upon the old boy